it looks like we're live on YouTube. This is the Complete Man Podcast, episode number 21, and we are live in 3, 2. All right, welcome back to the Complete Man Podcast with your host, Purdeep Sangha. Purdeep, how you doing today, man?
Hey, what's up, Nathan? I'm doing pretty good, man. How about yourself?
I'm doing okay. It is, as we're recording this, it's starting to get cold here in Colorado. How's the weather up there in Canada?
It's getting cold, not too bad. It's about -1 Celsius, so I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but
Just
we had
below
our
freezing?
yeah, I guess so. Yeah, just below freezing, and so we had our first snowfall yesterday, which wasn't that bad, but we'll see what ends up happening. I'm on the eastern side, just you can say in Ontario, which is it's not even totally east because we have the Maritimes, which is like Newfoundland and New Brunswick and all that. They're far east. We're closer to Buffalo, so you can say that's as far east as we are, and we didn't get that much snow yet. But the West Coast, there's my mom lives in Kelowna, British Columbia, and they got hammered with snow a few days ago. So it just tells you how big our countries are and how diverse our weather patterns can be. Right, on one end, it's like completely different weather than the other.
Well, I had to drive to Denver. I'm in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I had to drive just 50 miles south the other day to Denver, and we had no snow. And by the time I got to Denver, there was a bunch of snow all over the ground, and so it ended up screwing with my commute. And I was like, I did not expect snow. So even just city to city, sometimes the weather can be completely different. It's crazy.
Yeah, especially, and what I'm finding now, this is not the topic of today. We're not going to talk about climate change, but one of the things that we are seeing drastic changes in the climate and the weather patterns. Like we had a super dry summer in a lot of areas, a lot more forest fires, and then all of a sudden, some places just got hammered with snow. So things are changing a little bit, but maybe we'll save that for another topic.
Okay. What do we have on the agenda for today's episode?
Well, today's a completely different topic. It's about how to get people to do what you want them to do, and how do you actually do that?
As a marketer, I feel completely inept to discuss this with you today. Now, what do you mean specifically? Like how to get your kids to brush their teeth, or how do you get your clients to take the action that you're trying to get them to take so they can improve their life? What do you mean exactly?
Yeah, it's basically this overall theme or strategy that every person should take in order to influence other people. And when I say should, it's just one tool in the toolbox. There's many different ways of influence something or influencing an individual, but this is one that I thought was actually very effective, and I've used it over the years, and actually works very well. And it comes back to the core concept of why do we actually communicate? And we communicate. I think there's a number of reasons why we communicate, but the foremost reason is to have influence. We speak, we have body gestures, we do things in a way or in a manner to influence other people because we want them to do something. Even though it's not do anything, we want them to do something, whether it's understand a message that we're trying to relay. They might not have to act on it, but we just want them to understand, or we might actually want them to physically do something or respond to something. So communication is influence. And so if we get better at influencing other individuals, then we can actually communicate more effectively, because that's essentially what it is. And a lot of people get frustrated, especially in leadership roles. Why aren't people doing this? A lot of it has to do with communication breakdown. And people don't understand necessarily how to communicate. And we're going to focus on particularly, not necessarily marketing communication, although this does fall into this, but this is when you're working with someone, whether it's a colleague or a spouse or whatever it is, how do you get them on board with what you want them to do?
Okay, so one thing as a marketer that kind of sucks is everybody looks at you with this lens of suspicion, like you're manipulating me. And so I'm hyper conscious about this. I do my best not to manipulate people. And even in my profession, I'm very much I'll use every trick in the book if I think it's the right thing for you. But if I don't think it's the right thing for you, I'm just going to tell you, no, this is probably not the thing that you should buy. But when you become too good at influence and persuasion, especially the people closest to you, they look at you and they're like, I've seen you do this before. I know that you are a master influencer. So before we jump into it, I want to get your thoughts on the closest people to you. Once they catch on that you understand how to influence people and get what you want, navigating those situations from that point forward. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is really interesting. I was having a conversation with someone the other day. We were talking about hypnotherapy versus hypnotism,
Hmm.
in terms of the guys and gals that go up there and put on an act and get people to do things. I'm actually trained in hypnotherapy, and one of the interesting things is you can't get anybody to do what they don't already want to do, and what they're not willing to do. So the fact that people are out there trying to hypnotize people and get them to do things that they don't want to do, that's fake. Yeah, that is completely not how it works. Sub or unconsciously, a lot of these people want to do that. There's something inner desire in them. That's why we have people that go to hypnotherapy sessions for getting rid of smoking or some kind of addiction or whatever it may be. And so the reason why I bring this up is because you can't influence anybody to do something that they don't already want to do or have a desire to do in the future.
Mhm.
And so when we influence someone, even though we might be able to influence them temporarily, and this does go to marketing, that's why we have this thing called buyer's remorse after. And so you can influence someone to do something temporarily. You cannot influence someone to do something long term, right? That does not work. That's when you become a babysitter. That influence that has to come from within. That's an internal drive. That's internal motivation. That's internal inspiration, as I call it. That's what you have to ignite in the other person. And that person has to continue to fuel it themselves. So, this concept that we can continuously manipulate someone to do something, yes, you can if you're really good at it, but it's a lot of friggin' work.
Yeah.
And the other person typically catches on after a while and it becomes more like butting heads. So that's not winning. And essentially what influence is about, if you want to influence someone effectively, it's about win-win situations, right? In a relationship, even in marketing. In marketing, there's people that push the boundaries. Yes, there's a lot of science out there. We do a lot of neuroscience when it comes to marketing aspects. It's, yeah, you can get someone to buy, but that doesn't mean they're going to like your product after. That doesn't mean that they're going to sing your praises after, right? And that is the difference. It might be a short-term win versus a long-term win. And what we are talking about here today is a long-term win, because marketing is essentially, good marketers get people to make a decision whether to buy or not to buy. That's what marketing is about. It's not about getting them to buy. It's about getting them to make a decision to either buy or not buy, because you don't want people sitting on the fence, right? That's no man's land. You want people who truly want the product or service, or people who are considering it, but maybe they don't have belief in themselves. Maybe they don't have full belief in the product or the service itself. Maybe there's not enough social proof or whatever it may be. And your job is maybe just to push them over the tipping edge. Some of those people might come back and return your product or service, and some of those people might continue and rave about you. But the decision there, or the whole purpose, is to get someone to make a decision. If you take a look at it from that perspective, then it no longer becomes manipulation.
Okay. So I really like that. One thing that I've always thought about is kind of the difference between persuasion and influence versus manipulation is when you get somebody to do something that you know they're going to later rejoice in. That is persuasion and influence. When you get somebody to do something that they're going to later regret doing, that is manipulation. And so having a clear distinction in, I know how to use these tactics, I know how to influence people, but having a good boundary for yourself of when is it moral and when is it not moral, I think is important before we jump into the conversation.
Yeah, it is. And one of the examples I can use, real life examples, is we're starting up a mastermind here, a 6-month mastermind in January. And we have, I believe, 9 people in the mastermind. There's about 14 people who are interested. And I had to do some work. I had to do some work to get the fence sitters on the side, whichever side it was, whether they wanted to or not. Part of me, it was tough. It was an internal struggle, because I'm like, I don't want to force people into this program. But in my conversations with some of these individuals, they desperately needed it. And I knew that if they took this program, that they would actually learn something that could change their business and change their lives.
Hmm.
And I know that for a fact, but they have to make the decision to do that, not me. So I would lay things out in front of them and follow up, right? But it's ultimately their decision. So I had that internal struggle myself. And there's a couple of people that went in and actually backed out after because they didn't have belief in themselves that they'd be able to execute. And that happens. And our job is not to, pull them back onto the right side. Our job is to be there, continue to nurture, be there to support. And if they choose to come back over, they will. And many of those people do after a while, because some of those people go for a year or whatever. I'm talking about our product specifically, but this happens for other people. And they come back eventually and they say, yeah, I just wasted a year and I didn't do anything. In fact, I'm in a worse situation.
Yeah. And you mentioned if it's the right thing for them, if you know that it's going to be something that helps them, you kind of have an obligation to do everything that you can to make sure that it's an available option and let them know that, hey, this is going to help you. So let's talk about some of those. That's the situation. You know that what you've got for somebody is going to help them. You're not trying to get them to do something you know they're going to later regret. You've got something that you need to persuade them on. They're still on the fence. What were the things that you wanted to talk about today that can help you accomplish that?
Yeah, and it comes to the strategy that I use with a lot of individuals, and I've taught my teams this, and it's what I call the box. And I learned this actually in my relationship with my wife, because her and I had gone through some tough times. And when I really went through and we were sitting together and I was trying to figure out, okay, how do we get through these challenges? What are actually causing our challenges? Something that became very evident to me was that she had her own box in terms of how she wanted her life to be prior to me being even in the picture. It just so happens we got together and she continued to have that box in her mind. And a lot of people call that a blueprint, for example. That box wasn't working out for a relationship. I had my box, but my box I've learned over the years, because of obviously being in this field, to break that down, right? And when two people get into a relationship, you have to have a joint box, right? It's no longer your box and my box. It is a joint box. So as I was having this conversation with my wife, something struck me. I'm like, you know what the problem is? The problem is the box. The problem isn't the things that are inside the box, because we essentially wanted very similar things. So the way I picture it, and if you can visualize this, is if you take a shoebox or whatever it is, and you can have things in that shoebox. I tend to draw triangles and circles and squares, kind of like a kid toys, and I put them in there. And one could be, I want to make this much money. I want to have this kind of a house. I want to have, these material things, or whatever it may be. Those are elements within the box. And she had her own elements and I had my own elements. The problem is that she had her own elements in her box the way she wanted them configured. And I had parts of mine the way I wanted to configure it. And our configuration was not working because we didn't have a joint box. So the simple way to put that is, we both wanted the same things, very similar things. The what? The elements within the box. Those are the what you want in life, right? The box is the how you actually get those things. Because if you want things in a particular way, in a particular fashion, that doesn't necessarily work out for the other person. What you have to do is break down that box, actually get rid of the box altogether, take out those elements, and work with the other person to figure out how to create a new box together. So essentially what we did is she took out her elements, I took out my elements, we brought them together to see, okay, what common elements do we have, and created a new box in terms of how are we going to get this. Now we're on the same page. Hopefully that analogy is almost as clear as it is when I draw it out for people. But what you are doing is essentially you are saying, okay, what is it that you want? What is it that I want? Okay, where are we on the same page? Let's put those things in a box and let's figure out how we are both going to get there and what we both need to do. Here's why this is so impactful. Because when the other person has their own box, they are almost resistant to doing it your way, to even looking in your own box. But when you pull those elements out and you throw them on the ground and you say, okay, my box is gone and these are just the elements, they are more open to saying, okay, let's actually do this. And they actually start creating ideas in terms of how to help you get your own elements and how to get their own elements as well. So now they're becoming proactive. Now they're actually being there and actually coming up with strategies to help you get what you want. And that is the difference here, is when you try to get what you want without trying to figure out what they want and how you can do it jointly, it never works. In fact, it may work short term, but it never works long term. So that is the overarching strategy, is create a joint box with both of your elements.
So, what do you do when you find we don't have a compatibility? Like we're 100% on board with 98 out of 100 things, but you want to have kids and I want to have a career, or you want to live by the ocean and I want to live in the mountains. And it's almost to the point where it's irreconcilable. Like this partnership, this business, this relationship that I'm in, whatever, it hits so many check marks. I can't even imagine asking for anything better. But there's this one thing that is a major thing in my box and a major thing in her box, and they just won't fit in the same box.
Yeah, and that's why it can't be either or. And that becomes a challenge. Anytime you have two options, it becomes an either or. And when you talk about ocean versus mountains, that's exactly what my wife, a conversation her and I have all the time. And so our compromise is, okay, have a house by the lake and a house in the mountains. So that's the compromise. Or you could say maybe we live somewhere part-time and we go travel for part of the time and we live somewhere else that's in the other kind of geography. So there's always a win-win situation. And both parties, this is really what it comes down to in a relationship and in a work environment. Most people want to do good things for other people. Most people want to help other people achieve what they want. The challenge is when they feel like they have to give up something themselves. So we, as influencers, have to show them that they're not giving anything up that is of high priority for them. In fact, they will be able to achieve that and help the other person achieve what they want. So when you bring out that part in the other person, then you can always find, majority of the time, 99% of the time, you can find a win-win solution. The problem becomes when people become narrow-minded and closed-minded and say they want it exactly this way and this is the only way that I want it. For example, my wife said, I want a house by the lake in this city, in this neighborhood. And I said, you got to open up your mind a little bit. What is more important, the neighborhood or house by the lake? And then when we went through the process, we found out what was absolutely most important to her, and she was open to living in other cities. Mm-hmm. So when you break it down and you find out what the priorities are of that, the highest priorities, then you're most likely to find a compromise. But there are people that don't want to compromise. And those are what I call red light people. So there's green light people, there's amber light people, and there's red light people. And red light people don't necessarily like to compromise. That is a warning sign for you to not maybe be in that type of a relationship with that person.
Mm-hmm. So one of my favorite books that kind of first opened this whole concept up to me was Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Where are some of the resources where you've been able to implement, improve, get a grasp on this type of, I don't want to say negotiating, but you mentioned the win-win. When I first heard that word win-win, I was like, oh, we can both, it's not a zero-sum game. We can both walk away from this feeling like winners. Where are some resources for the people that are interested in this? Like, where did you learn this and learn to master it from?
Sure. So this is something that I learned, I think, when I was younger, but I wasn't a master at it. I had dabbled in it a little bit. I understood the concept, but it wasn't something that I was really good at. It wasn't until I actually broke up with my ex, my childhood sweetheart. And I was heartbroken. And I started, for 3 years, I went on this deep dive into relationships and why relationships work and why they don't, and particularly marriages. And what I found out was I came across this book and a gentleman named Willard Harley. And I don't think he may still be around. I don't know. But he was a very, very influential person in the marriage and relationship space in the US. Very well known for what he does. Typically tradition, kind of Christian style relationships and marriages. Learned his teachings, but he has a book. He has a number of books. Fall in Love, Stay in Love is one of the books I would recommend for anybody who is in a relationship. Not only will you learn how to have a more effective relationship with your spouse, but also your children and other people around you. In his book, there was a concept of a policy of joint agreement, an enthusiastic joint agreement, which means that you never do anything in a relationship unless both people are enthusiastic about it. And I thought that was impossible at first, right? Because people teach you compromise, right? And people teach you influence is like, how do you get your own way? And when you compromise, for example, what I didn't realize is both people aren't happy typically.
Mm-hmm.
And so that concept didn't work out. And I always was trying to be that person that compromised. And I'm like, okay, she's not happy. I'm not happy. This isn't freaking working. But also in his book, he talked about win-win. And that was probably the first time it really hit me, this concept of win-win. You mean both sides can actually win? And so that was one of the most profound and pivotal moments for me. So I would recommend anybody out there going and getting that book, Fall in Love, Stay in Love. Really good book.
All right. I think we mentioned that book last week as well, so I definitely need to check that out as well. I know that in your book, you actually talk about some of this stuff as well, The Complete Man. And if people want to check out that book, or if people want to check out more episodes of the podcast, where's the two best places to go?
Yeah. If you like the physical copy, go to completemanbook.com. That'll take you to the Amazon site. If you want the audio and the digital ebook, you can go to completemanaudio.com. And if you use a promo code VICTORY75, so all together, victory, and then the number 75, you will get 75% off the digital audio and the digital ebook. If you want to listen to more podcast episodes, check out completemanpodcast.com, but also check out our YouTube channel, youtubeformen.com. We actually started to promote it more. We're at 1,200 subscribers right now,
Nice.
which we're super happy about. We're getting a lot of people check it out. So I want to thank you for subscribing. For those of you who have checked it out and supported us, I very much appreciate that. So those are the two places. Please check out youtubeformen.com and give us a subscribe.
All right, man. And until next time, we will catch you later.
Can't wait.